Have you ever heard of a love story that begins with just $5? A story where one small act of sacrifice changes the course of two lives forever? Stay with me until the end, because this one will touch your heart deeply, and if it moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because stories like this are meant to remind us all that miracles still exist in the unlikeliest places. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Hannah, a young nurse in her mid-20s, found herself standing outside a cozy little cafe downtown. Her shoes were worn, her scrubs were damp, and her wallet was nearly empty. Life hadn't been kind to her lately. Her mother's hospital bills drained most of her savings, and her night shifts barely covered rent. She had $5 left, folded carefully in her pocket, and she debated all morning whether to spend it on bus fare, a small meal, or save it for tomorrow. But when she looked at the cafe window and saw the warm lights and people laughing inside, something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she deserved a moment of comfort. Inside, she ordered the cheapest drink she could, an iced tea, and handed over her last $5 bill. She didn't know it yet, but that simple choice would change her destiny. As she waited for her drink, Hannah checked her phone nervously. Tonight was supposed to be her first blind date in years. A friend from the hospital had begged her to try, saying she deserved someone who cared for her, someone who would see the heart behind her tired eyes. Hannah wasn't sure. Love had never been easy for her, and after her last relationship ended painfully, she promised herself she'd never waste time on false hopes again. But loneliness has a way of breaking even the strongest promises, and so she had agreed. At that exact moment, across the cafe, a man named Daniel sat quietly at a corner table. He looked calm, collected, and perhaps even a little intimidating to those who passed by. In truth, Daniel was the CEO of that very cafe chain, a self-made man in his 30s who had built his business from nothing after losing his parents young. His wealth and success didn't erase the emptiness he carried inside, and though people admired him, he often felt invisible in crowded rooms. He longed for someone who could see him as more than his title, more than his money. Daniel's friend had set him up for the same blind date that night. He had laughed it off at first, skeptical that strangers could find connection through chance. But something inside him, perhaps the same whisper Hannah had felt, told him to try. When Hannah entered, Daniel noticed her immediately. Not because she was dressed up, not because she sparkled like others did. No, she looked tired, her hair slightly messy from the rain, and her scrubs looked like she had come straight from work. But her eyes carried a quiet strength, the kind that comes from carrying burdens and still choosing kindness. She sat down hesitantly across from him, clutching her cheap drink. "You must be Hannah," Daniel said softly, offering a small smile. Her cheeks warmed. "And you must be Daniel." They talked awkwardly at first, about work, about favorite books, about how strange blind dates could feel. But soon, the walls around them began to fall. Daniel didn't tell her who he really was. He wanted to be seen, not as a CEO, but as a man who laughed at silly jokes and cared about people's stories. And Hannah didn't tell him she had spent her very last dollar just to sit there, pretending she belonged in that warm cafe. Hours passed without them noticing. Daniel found himself leaning closer, listening to every word she spoke. She talked about her patients, about the elderly man who smiled whenever she sang to him while changing 4 lines, about the children who called her Angel when she brought them juice. She talked about her struggles too, rent, exhaustion, the endless worry about her mother's health. But she never once complained. She spoke with grace, with humility. At one point, Hannah excused herself to the counter, embarrassed. She had hoped to buy them a small pastry to share but realized with a heavy heart that she had no money left. Her card was declined, and she stood frozen, cheeks burning with shame. Daniel saw everything. He stood, walked to the counter, and quietly paid for not just the pastry but the rest of her meal. When Hannah returned, stunned, he didn't mention it. Instead, he slid the plate toward her and said gently, "Sometimes we all need someone to take care of us, even if just for a moment." Her eyes filled with tears. Nobody had said words like that to her in years. The night ended beautifully, with laughter, soft glances, and the promise to see each other again. But before they left, Daniel turned to her. He could no longer hide who he was. "Hannah," he said carefully, "there's something I should tell you. I'm not just Daniel from down the street. I own this cafe. In fact, I built it from scratch years ago." Hannah froze, her heart sinking. She thought of her last $5 spent on the drink, how small she must have seemed in his world of wealth. I'm sorry," she whispered, standing quickly. "I shouldn't have wasted your time. I don't have anything to offer someone like you." But Daniel reached for her hand, his eyes firm but kind. "Stop. Don't you see? You offered me something money can't buy. You gave me your honesty, your laughter, your story. Do you know how rare that is in my life? People pretend with me all the time. But you were real. And that's worth more than anything." Her tears fell freely then, because for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Truly seen. Weeks turned into months, and what began with a blind date grew into a love story. Daniel didn't just help Hannah with her struggles, he stood beside her. He supported her mother's treatment, but more importantly, he lifted Hannah's spirit,